having a design system to follow helps organise the production sequence on a farm and identify what is the most beneficial way to set up systems so that they increase in health over time, and you can start to develop the complexity, because often when you move onto a farm it's degraded state, it hasn't got that biological functioning complexity and health established, so you've got to be able to go through a progression of stages to first establish the pioneer species and the windbreaks and beneficial grazing systems to help re-establish some of the fertility on the farm, so that you can then later establish a wider range of productive species and establish the beneficial connections between those production systems. So the first stage often is to create some detailed maps on which you can design upon. So it's a good idea to get some detailed plan views of the site, and with those plan views to be able to identify what the existing features are on that farm system, what are the potentials of water flow and storage and drainage on that site, and then to also start mapping out where there's different areas of production and how can you establish some good connections between them. And that flows into the next thing of developing some concept sketches. So once you've got an idea about the different characteristics of that site, so what is the topography, where is the wind coming from, where is the sun coming from, where are the most beneficial areas for production, you can then start mapping out where you'd start to locate those types of production and how can you start establishing good connections between them. And that will develop into a final plan where you can do a good copy of what's the final idea of where all the production systems are and how they interconnect with each other. And then you've got to go through a bit of a stage of thinking about what resources are there to support that production that you've got designed, how might that refine what that production looks like, and then recommendation of how you implement that design and the costs associated with establishing it. There's also a bit of a set procedure normally that you do with establishing a design in a farm. The first one is to do with just identifying the characteristics of that site, and in particular how can you start to use water to the most benefit to support production. In New Zealand, water is not such a limiting factor. In a lot of overseas countries it is, but in the east coast of New Zealand in particular, drought conditions can be quite extreme, and it really helps to be able to consider the potential on that farm to store water, to create swales, which are little ditches on contour which can be used to plant out tree systems. So water's stored in those swales, and that water storage then soaks into the ground and can be used to help establish tree systems in association with those swales. And also, how can you drain wet areas or establish wetland systems to help regenerate some of the natural ecosystems on that farm system. The next one is normally access and housing. So access is best done along ridge lines because water flows off ridges. So they're the best way to access and go up in elevation on a site. And then when you are at the elevation you want to go across the site to establish roads that are on the same contour, so they often curve around the property in relation to the contours of that site. So you go up a section along the ridge and then along the section along roads that are established on contour. And then normally around the mid-elevation zone of your site you'd establish your house site and you'd probably level off an area to create a nice flat compacted surface to build upon. And the last one is to set up your production systems, which often involves establishing fences first. and establishing your first plantings of windbreaks and regenerative plants that will help moderate the conditions on that site and start to build up the soil ecology to allow more sensitive productive species to become established. Another thing is to set up grazing systems, because even on quite an impoverished, degraded farm site, the grazing of livestock can help rehabilitate the soil and start to turn plant matter into a manure that can help build up the soil life and carbon matter, and that will help feed the soil and result in better plant growth. So there's a lot of things to consider in the design of a property, and it helps to have a design process and to go through those stages of recognising the features of that site, to develop some concept sketches and to refine that into a final plan in relation to the resources available and the stages of implementation.